Welcome to Minnesota Housing's webinar on opportunities to finance multifamily and single-family development in your community. Our mission at Minnesota Housing is that housing is the foundation for success. So we collaborate with individuals, communities, and partners to create, preserve, and finance affordable housing. I'm going to provide an overview of some welcome and introductions. Today's presentation will include 4 presenters in total. My name is Devin Pullman. I'm a supervisor in our multifamily division working with a variety of multifamily programs. I'll be presenting first on today's webinar, including providing an overview of a number of different multifamily resources and information, particularly as it relates to location and ways to be successful in accessing resources from Minnesota Housing. I'm also joined today by Cody Thurnow, who represents our research department. He'll be providing an overview of our community profile tools, which are some really great tools that help you understand not only certain analytics within your community, but how those then interplay into strategic priorities of the agency and can really help position you to understand how things like site location and other things can help you to be competitive in maximizing opportunities in your respective areas to produce more or preserve affordable housing. I'm also joined today by Margaret Kaplan, who is our Community Development Director. She's going to drill down on a couple of different examples of ways communities have come together at a community level to be able to attract and bring in new affordable housing resources to their community. So kind of bringing all the pieces together in terms of some of our funding priorities, resources we make available, and then how locations within those respective communities kind of align to help those communities be successful in accessing our multifamily funding. And last but not least, we're rounded out on today's presentation with Leanne McKenzie, who's representing our single-family division, and she's going to provide an overview of single-family homeownership and home improvement opportunities and ways you can leverage Minnesota Housing resources to make improvements there within your respective communities. So in terms of the agenda, I'll be covering multifamily housing development resources and providing an overview of that. I'll also be talking about our competitive funding standards and priorities. Cody's going to cover our community profiles and data planning tools, which are really cool resources, and he'll be able to do a more interactive demonstration and make sure you have the resources so that you can access these tools independently of us, or always call us too if you need additional assistance. Margaret's going to talk about local communities' influence, like I just mentioned, and then Leanne will round out with the single-family homeownership and home improvement resources. So that's what we have on deck for you today. In terms of different eligible housing types and development opportunities in our multifamily context, we are looking for communities or developers to finance permanent general occupant rental housing. In our multifamily area, there is a requirement for a minimum of 4 units. Many of our developments do tend to be significantly larger than that. There are a variety of activities that are eligible for our resources at Minnesota Housing through our multifamily division, and those include and kind of run the spectrum of things you see listed on the slide, things from new construction to rehabilitation, adaptive reuse, preservation, rental assistance, and even acquisition of land or existing structures. And it is, kind of interesting to see how, given different market dynamics and characteristics over time, we do tend to see different types of housing activities being sought after. We have seen an increase in new construction activities with our most recent RFP selection awards, but we continue to place a high emphasis on preservation too in key communities as well. In terms of the types of resources you can actually access for multifamily development in your areas, they kind of fall into 3 broad categories. The first include deferred loans, which are generally interest-free and typically 30 years. We do have the flexibility if your funding source does require that loan carry a higher rate or an interest rate, such as low-income housing tax credits often require an interest rate attached to it. We can make these at very low interest rates as well, but typically most communities are interested in the deferred loan resource, which is interest-free. In some cases, there are cash flow repayment provisions that may be required, but in general, this can be a really great gap financing resource tool for many developments and many communities as they're looking to produce affordable housing. We also offer amortizing first mortgages at the agency. Typically, those are administered under our Lemire program. And one thing I just want to draw your attention to, if you are interested in amortizing first mortgage loans through the agency, we do have program guides and term sheets on our website, or we can help direct you to those if you have a hard time finding those, where you can drill down and find out more information about specific terms for our amortizing first mortgage loans. Lastly, we are known for offering our low-income housing tax credits. Tax credits reduce investor tax liability in exchange for equity. We typically fund anywhere between 12 to 15 affordable projects with tax credits on an annual basis. That can range from 7 to 900 or so units. Tax credits then are sold to investors and do generate a very significant amount in proceeds that are used for affordable housing development. The total development cost of projects financed with competitive tax credits typically in a given year is somewhere between 200 and 250 million. And the tax credit has been a very important component and resource in the production of affordable housing generally. This is also a very highly competitive resource within the agency's resource toolbox. One of the really great things about Minnesota Housing and the way we interact kind of in this development space is that we have, and I think the Minnesota community in general is really well positioned here because we have what we call a consolidated annual RFP. And you may be thinking, that's a lot of words. What does that mean exactly? Well, what that means is that we coordinate with funding partners, and those include the funding partners listed on the slide here, to allow our applicants to access funding from a variety of partners, primarily through just one application process. So we have worked this way for probably close to 20 years now, really value our funding partner relationships and feel that it's an important delivery mechanism to be able to allocate resources more efficiently to projects so that people can come in and apply through our consolidated annual RFP process and requesting resources from Minnesota Housing, but any of these other funding partners as well, depending on your specific geography and what additional funding resources might be available in your geography. And these resources can vary from year to year, but they include the Metropolitan Council that provides project-based vouchers, DEED, the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, the St. Paul PHA, also sometimes providing vouchers, and the Metro HRA. So these are really important funding partners and allow sort of a one-stop shopping experience for our applicants. In addition to our consolidated RFP, that application process is typically due in mid-June every year, and usually we release the consolidated RFP application in mid to late April every year, giving applicants about a 2-month window to put their application package together. In addition to that, we also offer year-round financing, and that's something that may be a lesser known feature of us, but it's certainly a really important one, and we want to continue to get the word out and the message out that we are open for business year-round. And you can certainly access our first mortgage financing tools available annually. In addition to that, depending on resource availability, we may have other types of deferred loan resources available for preservation or other types of activities. So keep us in mind, even outside of the consolidated RFP, though some resources are only allocated through the consolidated RFP, like our tax credit program. The only other thing I'll mention about the consolidated RFP, we do have a number of different funding sources for things like deferred loans. And when you do come in and apply to us, you don't have to differentiate, well, I want X type of funding in a deferred loan. I want Challenge, I want, National Housing Trust Fund, I want something else. We kind of bundle all those deferred loan resources internally, and as we're reviewing applications, we make sure that we're utilizing all the available resources on the table and putting them in those projects where those funds can best be allocated and used. So hopefully you're now wondering, well, how do I actually successfully access your funding at Minnesota Housing? Because we've got affordable housing needs in our community, and I'm interested. Where do we go from here? And part of the goal of today's presentation is to just provide you with some basic overview of key things that are important starting points to be able to learn more about our process and how to successfully access our funding. In our multifamily area, and I think this is also true for single family, we do have selection standards. Those are kind of threshold criteria. So we do expect the project to be feasible and for the sponsor to have sufficient organizational and developer to have sufficient organizational capacity. And by capacity, we're looking at past housing experience, mission, current and expected future capacity, pipeline of projects, if you have a pipeline, things in the pipeline, ability to maintain the housing long term, and also partnerships. And I really want to emphasize that partnership aspect, because we know that sometimes when you are looking to develop something new in your community, or something hasn't been done in some time, or you're experiencing significant growth, how you demonstrate experience can often be very effectively done through those partnership aspects of a project. So that is something that we recognize and certainly want to communicate to you that there's opportunity there. With respect to feasibility, we're looking at things like the site, making sure it's appropriate for multifamily housing development, the market, ensuring that there's a market need as demonstrated by vacancy and other economic indicators. Cost reasonableness is key. We want to ensure that high quality, good quality affordable housing is developed. We do have architectural design standards in place, but there needs to be cost reasonableness in projects where there's public subsidy and resources going into those projects. So we have a number of different tools we use to help ensure that there is cost reasonableness and cost containment within these types of larger projects. There also needs to be long-term financial viability of the project. With respect, so those encompass our selection standards. And then with respect to our strategic priorities, there are 7 priorities, and we're going to drill down on some of these in more detail, and Cody's going to be able to bring up some location-specific information, so you'll sort of get to see some of these in action. But essentially, our strategic priorities, and you do have to meet one of these 7. Many times, successful proposals, it's effective for them to meet more than one of these 7, but it is important for you to know that your project has to meet one of these 7. So you have to demonstrate access to fixed transit, that you're in Greater Minnesota and you constitute a workforce housing community, that the project is in an economic integration area, or that the project itself promotes economic integration. It's a tribal area. You demonstrate planned community development or some type of community development initiative in your area, that there's a preservation and you meet our criteria around preservation, or supportive housing. So those things have to be met in order to kind of move forward within our process. And once you demonstrate capacity feasibility and that you meet one of our strategic priorities, we then move into sort of the competitive scoring process of our this would apply to our consolidated RFP at least, where we look at a number of different categories around scoring as we go through your application. And those things that we review and score on are listed here. They include greatest need tenant focus, looking at things like providing large family housing, providing permanent supportive housing for high priority homeless and people with disabilities. That would be within our greatest need tenant focus, where we have certain scoring preferences for those populations or housing types. Moving into our serving lowest income for long durations category, here we're looking at things like serving lowest income tenants and rent reductions, whether or not you're providing rental assistance or partnering with someone that can help bring resources to the table to provide for that rental assistance. And then long-term affordability. That's something new this year, where we're providing additional points and pointing preferences for maintaining that development as affordable for extending out even past 30 years to 35 or 40 years, recognizing there are significant resources that go into, not just financial resources that go into the project, but all the time and effort and energy kind of at the ground level, at the community level, to make these projects happen. And certainly want to recognize the need to maintain the affordability of these projects and good quality housing over time. Within areas of opportunity, and this is going to be something we're going to focus on much more throughout the presentation today, there are 4 key things that we look at more intensely here in our review. The first is economic integration, and that can either be a community that has opportunity for economic integration or within a particular development by the mix of units. Access to high-performing schools, and that applies for projects that are serving large families, and Cody will talk more about that as well. Workforce housing communities and location efficiency. So those are things that I think right now within your given communities, if you are interested in looking to see how you could position different sites and different opportunities in your locality, you can start to drill in and look and explore some sites according to these preference scoring priorities and see where you may have more opportunities in your respective areas. Within our supporting community and economic development scoring area, there we're looking at whether or not you had a planned community development effort within your community where you're bringing stakeholders together to develop a plan and commit some different resources to creating community development opportunities that include housing as part of those opportunities, but are more than just the proposed housing development site itself. We're also looking at rural tribal areas here, recognizing they can have some of their own unique market challenges. Within the tax credit program, if you are interested in accessing low-income housing tax credits, we do have a provision around whether or not the development's in a qualified census tract, and if so, if there's a corresponding community revitalization plan that attaches to that area in that project. And then we're also looking at minority-owned and women-owned business enterprise and looking at kind of the ownership structure of kind of the key members of the development team, architects, general contractors, developers, to see whether or not there's minority and women-owned business enterprise ownership involved there. Within our preservation area, we have 3 thresholds that are important to be aware of when we're looking at funding preservation and it meeting our scoring criteria. Those are, number 1, risk of loss due to market conversion. Number 2, the property has to demonstrate critical physical needs. Or number 3, there has to be substantive questions around ownership capacity or program commitment. And then there are additional points around preserving existing federal assistance within those units, and then critical affordable units at risk of loss. Moving into our efficient use of scarce resources, here we're really focused on looking at financial readiness to proceed and leveraged funds, recognizing that it often does take a number of different financial commitments from a number of different sources to make the project financially ready to move forward. And readiness, certainly is a very key consideration as we're going through our review process. We also look and value other types of contributions, whether that's land donation, and these are places where, cities really have an important way to contribute to these types of projects, or city write-downs of the development site, in-kind work and materials and donations of those types of materials, local government donations or waivers for specific project costs, sack and whack fees, other types of things along those lines, or reservation land with long-term low-cost leases. So I really want to underscore, cities, counties, local communities do have really important levers and ways you can help contribute in a significant and meaningful way that are evaluated in our scoring process and certainly are meaningful to helping to advance that project and moving it forward. We also look at intermediary costs and cost containment within this scoring criteria. And lastly, we look at building characteristics. There are some modest pointing incentives for universal design, recognizing that we will all age and are aging within Minnesota, and certain communities are more subject to that than others. And then we certainly promote smoke-free buildings as well. So moving into thinking about how do these different categories, that's a lot of things that I just covered. And so, trying to do all of those things and point really well on all of those things would not be attainable. And that's not really our goal at the agency. Our goal with our scoring criterion is to really create opportunity for different locations, for different types of housing needs, but for the greatest housing need within those respective different locations and communities. And so in this chart, we're just trying to sort of show different types of opportunities and different ways different developments can get funded within our scoring framework here at Minnesota Housing. And again, this is in a multifamily context. But for example, we had a new construction development in Rochester, Minnesota recently that tended to point very well in a number of different areas of opportunity, both location efficiency, workforce housing, and economic integration. It tended to point extremely well within that particular scoring criterion. It also pointed extremely well with respect to efficient use of resources, was very financially ready, had some great additional contributions, low intermediary costs, and you can see that particular development scored very high and was successful in our funding process. Similarly, we had another development, a new construction development in Austin. I think this may have been a permanent supportive housing development that was providing resources for serving populations with very significant needs. And this had scored very well within our greatest need category. It also scored very well in our community and economic development area, had a very strong community development plan and initiative, very strong partnerships there that tended to make this project point out very well. And this project, similar to the one in Rochester, scored very well with respect to financial readiness as well. But we highlight these just in an effort to sort of say you can be serving different types of populations, different types of housing types, and scoring really well in different areas, and that development can still be very competitive within our overall consolidated RFP process. So with that, I'd like to next turn this over to Cody, who's going to drill down further into our community profile tool and give you a chance to actually look and see kind of how some of these locations intersect within our scoring opportunities, and just learn more about some of the data layers that we're using within our profile tools and how to access those. So I will just transition the headphone over to Cody and we'll go from there. Thank you.
Thanks, Devin. Again, my name is Cody Thurnell. I'm in our research and analysis division here at Minnesota Housing, and manage the Community Profiles planning tool. Community Profiles really has two main goals. The first being to provide Minnesota Housing staff and partners a comprehensive tool to assist in the planning and funding process for affordable housing. It also places everyone on a level playing field and allows Minnesota Housing's data-driven decision-making process to be more transparent. This is the 8th year of Minnesota Housing releasing the data that helps guide and inform our decisions. There are two content areas that I'll get into first that I want to outline in order to help users better understand the data provided within the Community Profiles interactive map. They are the RFP geographic priority areas and then the data layer themes. The geographic priorities include economic integration, location efficiency, rural and tribal designated areas, QCT tribal equivalent areas, and then workforce housing. Economic integration applies to census tracts in the Twin Cities 7-county metro area, along with tracts in and around Duluth, St. Cloud, and Rochester. Included within Community Profiles are census tracts within the Twin Cities, Duluth, St. Cloud, and Rochester that meet the first and second tier pointing criteria in the QAP. These are high areas with higher household income in those particular regions. Areas not eligible for economic integration points can be added as rural or tribal designated areas if they are located outside of the Twin Cities metro area and those tracts are not considered within Duluth, St. Cloud, and Rochester. Access to higher performing schools covers the same geographies mentioned with economic integration. If an area meets or exceeds 2 of 3 performance thresholds for its schools, it is considered to have access to higher performing schools. The performance metrics used are 3rd grade reading proficiency, 8th grade math proficiency, and on-time graduation rate. Location efficiency within Community Profiles contains details on the transit service types in the Twin Cities metro area, Duluth, East Grand Forks, La Crescent, Mankato, Moorhead, St. Cloud, and Rochester. There's no detail on dial-a-ride or deviated route and demand response opportunities found in communities throughout greater Minnesota. Walk score, also part of the location efficiency, also cannot be viewed via Community Profiles. Workforce housing includes cities that have seen job growth, are top job centers, or have a significant portion of their workforce traveling long distances into the community. The other content areas are data layer themes. We have over 30 indicators within community profiles from multiple sources to profile the social, demographic, and economic characteristics of households, the housing market, and employment as they pertain to the market for affordable housing. These individual data points are broken into 3 thematic categories: economy and workforce, household demographics, and housing market at the county and census tract geographies. Economy and workforce contains information about jobs, distance to work, and unemployment rates. The household demographics themes contain information about the people and households within a community, which includes basic demographic characteristics such as breakdown of age, proportion of population from communities of color, cost burden for renters and homeowners, and income characteristics. Finally, the housing market is broken into 2 themes: rental and home ownership market. This is our largest collection of data elements, includes information about costs for both renters and homeowners, vacancy rates for subsidized housing, median sales prices and change in sales price from the prior year, age of housing stock, tenure, and foreclosure rates. While we make the raw data available on Minnesota Housing's webpage, most data layer themes display in community profiles based on percentile rankings relative to rankings across the state. To access the data for community profiles for scoring or planning, go to Minnesota Housing's main website and click on Policy and Research located at the top of the page. Then just below that and to the right, click Community Profiles. This will bring you to the page currently on your screen. To access the data for the 2019 housing tax credits and 2018 RFP applications, click Community Profiles for scoring. I do want to make a note that we are in the process of updating our website. As Devin mentioned, we do fund year-round proposals, and so the data needs to remain live. So we are in the process of updating this website and should be available in the next couple of weeks. On the community profiles for scoring or planning page, you can find links to methodology and metadata documentation for data found within the interactive map used for scoring or planning. There's also a help document available that'll help walk you through common tasks of the mapping application. For those individuals who want to have access to the raw data, you can also download it from this page as well. To access the interactive map and the underlying data layer themes and geographic priority areas, click to view the interactive map highlighted on the screen. And with that, I'm going to go actually to a live demo and show you a few examples of how you might interact with the Community Profiles interactive map. When you first open Community Profiles, you'll see a map of Minnesota showing absolute change in households between the year 2000 and 2015 at the county geography. The map functions similarly to most interactive maps such as Google or Bing Maps in that you can pan, zoom, and click on a particular area of interest to get more information about the underlying data. So if I click on Blue Earth County, the underlying data layer themes show up, and you can see information related to the economy and workforce, household demographics, the rental market, and then the homeowner market. So as you can see, there's a lot of information built within the interactive map. If you are interested in a more precise location, you can enter an address into the search bar located at the top of the map. And as long as it's a valid address recognized by Policy Map, it will zoom into that point on the map. And say we had a property located at 1 Civic Center Plaza in Mankato. We enter the address in, and it will take us to our point of interest. Once there, you can click on the map similarly as before. This time, you'll receive demographic household information at the census tract level. But I'm more interested in this location's proximity to Minnesota Housing's geographic priorities. To add a geographic priority layer, I go to the upper left-hand corner and click on New Map. This will open up a box, either multifamily, single family, or below that is the number of data layer themes. I'm a multifamily developer, and I want to add, I'm interested in this site's location, efficiency, transit. And when I first add a layer to the map, it draws it as a solid blue color. But I know that there are different scoring criteria for location efficiency within Mankato. To display those on the map, I can go and click on Expand Legend in the right side of the map pane, and then under Filter, and then under Type, click Color Code All. And if I want to clean up my map just a little bit, I can remove the underlying data layer theme. And as you can see, this point, One Civic Center Plaza is located within a quarter mile of a fixed route transit stop, the highest scoring criteria for location efficiency. The final thing that I want to show within community profiles is how to create a custom region and report from community profiles. To do so, I click Draw Report Area in the upper right-hand corner, and then you're given 3 options to create your custom regions. I recommend doing the assembled custom regions, as the other 2 options only include census tracts or counties if the entirety is enclosed within those search parameters. So to create my custom region, as you can see, the outlines of the census tracts are highlighted, and I'm interested in these 2 census tracts that make up a large majority of downtown Mankato. When I know they're selected when they turn a semi-transparent color, and then I can click Done in the left pane of the map, and then you have to give the map a name in order for it to complete. So I'm just going to click in Mankato, and then Done. So it has created, as you can see in the kind of orange outline, it has created my custom region. To see my custom report, then I click on this little icon on the border, a dialog pop-up shows up, and then there's this See Minnesota Community Report. If I click on that, it'll display a custom report with all of the data layer themes values within those 2 census tracts. And with that, I'm going to pass the microphone on to Margaret.
Hi, thank you everyone. My name is Margaret Kaplan, and I'm the Community Development Director here at Minnesota Housing. I just wanted to talk a little bit about the way that local communities can influence the success of projects, and then also to provide a few examples of communities where they've been able to really sort of use that local energy and local work in order to make their projects more successful. So first off, and I don't want to go too far into the details that Devin has already provided, but we have a strategic priority for planned community development. That's one of the areas where local community activity really does make a huge difference in terms of the viability of projects. That is both within our strategic priorities, so one of the thresholds that communities can meet in order to sort of be successful for a project, but it's also one of our selection priorities as well too. So not only does it get you in the door in terms of your project, but it can also get you some points that are likely to make your project more successful. I'll get back to that in a second, but I also want to talk a little bit about some of the selection priorities. Now these are areas, the areas of opportunity where I think what a local community can do is less to influence whether you get these points and more to be really cognizant of how these are operating within your community. I think this is where communities and local decision makers being very knowledgeable, or at the very least familiar with the community profiles, can be really helpful, because it's those local land use decisions that very strongly influence where development can occur within communities. And if, as local decision makers, you're paying attention to things like, what are the areas that are going to receive location efficiency points or economic integration points, or those access to higher performing school points or workforce housing points. If you think about those in the context of your local land use decision making, and as you think about the way that you are partnering with the development community, being aware of the areas where you're going to be more successful, I think, overall can be really helpful in terms of bringing your project fully to funding. So as I mentioned, and I'm getting back to this question of planned community development, in our selection priorities, so the areas that get points, planned community development falls under this kind of bucket with supporting community and economic development. And one of the things that I think is really important for communities to understand is that planned community development is less about having a plan. So, you know, we don't want to receive that sort of 4-inch thick plan. It's really about, has a community come together, identified some priorities, and have active implementation on trying to achieve community-defined outcomes and objectives. So it has to be something that folks are actively working on, that has steps that have been identified and some level of timeline to it. It has to have some geographic boundaries on it, so it can't just be generically, you know, half the state. You actually have to have an area of concentration. Now, that doesn't have to be incredibly small. It has to be bigger than just the project itself. But, you know, it's really based on what is going to make logical sense for that community in terms of your targeted geography. So it has to be sort of a subset of a region, but once again, that's going to vary based on where you are. It has to respond to some sort of crisis or opportunity, and that's a pretty, I would say, broad statement in some ways. So it can be an economic opportunity, it can be transit-oriented development, it can be in response to job growth. It's really a community identifying, why are we doing this at this time, and why does it make sense for us to be moving forward with this? It has to, your plan has to include the production and rehabilitation of affordable housing as a key strategy. So it can't be, you know, a plan that's about parks that doesn't mention housing at all. Housing has to really be sort of a key part of the plan that you have. And there have to be specific activities or investments that the local community is pursuing in order to achieve those objectives. So it has to have more than just a list of steps. There also have to be sort of some key benchmarks and ways that the community is engaged in trying to push forward those local objectives. They can be approved by a wide variety of partners. So it's not necessarily something that the city has to adopt, or a county has to adopt, or a PHA has to adopt. It's really more that question of, are people coming together and pursuing a plan? It also can't be something that is exclusively a requirement from a local entity. In other words, a comp plan by itself in the metro area is not sufficient. It has to have something more. So it can be something that you're doing in complement to a comp plan, something that goes above and beyond those basic requirements. And you have to provide some level of evidence that the project that you're pursuing funding for contributes to the overall goals of the plan. In other words, that idea that housing and this particular housing development is somehow allowing the community to meet these overall objectives. I know this is an area where people have a lot of questions about them, and we are constantly trying to provide more and more guidance. And this is an area where if people have questions, I would very much encourage folks to reach out to the agency and ask for some technical assistance. The other area where local communities can provide a lot of influence is in efficient use of scarce resources and leverage. And there are two kind of buckets or two factors that can provide developments with quite a few points where local community activity can make a huge difference. One is in financial readiness to proceed. So overall, we're going to be looking at whether a project is ready to move forward. And this is where local financial contributions of, particularly, we've seen a lot of use of TIFs, but then also monetary grants and donations can help projects receive points for financial readiness to proceed. And this can be both the city itself putting resources into it, as I mentioned, TIF, but this also can include as communities come together and you're working with local partners, whether it's businesses or philanthropy. I think local jurisdictions, whether it's a city or a county, have a lot of influence over those partners and encouraging other folks to really put resources into development so that they can get points toward the success of their project. We also have another category that I think is a pretty good one for cities to be aware of, which is called other contributions. Sounds kind of catch-all. That really includes things such as land donation or write-down of the cost of development sites. It also can include in-kind contributions or fee waivers. Once again, this is an area where local jurisdictions have a lot of discretion about what you're doing with your local resources, and it can really help projects be both financially successful, but also get points in that other contributions area as well. So I'm going to provide a few examples of places where I think communities have come together in a really exceptional way that's led to the success of their projects. Two of them are from this year or this past year's selections, and one is from 2 years ago. And I think they provide sort of a good broad swath of the kinds of activities that cities can do that help projects move forward. The first one is in North Branch. It's a rental housing development called Cherokee Place. Now this is in North Branch, which is in Chisago County. One of the things that I think is really important is there has been a very concerted community effort to come together and think and plan for the housing future. And this is really an initiative that's been present in the whole Chisago Lakes area. Chisago County is far enough from the Twin Cities that it kind of has a rural feel, but it's close enough that you have a lot of folks who want to move there to work in the Twin Cities, and they also have a lot of small business development. And as they've begun to grow, and they've grown quite a lot, they've gained 1,000 jobs over the past 5 years, they've really struggled with this question of housing, and in particular, how do you house your local workforce? So they came together and they brought together this proposal for 48 rental units. They serve a lot of large families, so it's 1, 2, and 3 bedroom units. And it also includes 5 units for long-term homelessness. So between sort of these characteristics, they receive points for workforce housing, planned community development, and supportive housing. The other thing I would say is, you know, if you look overall at community profiles and you look at this particular site, as a community leader, you're going to see that it did point exceptionally well on a lot of those sort of geographic priorities. So it was very well thought out, it was very smart development, and it was able to be successful. The next example is in New Ulm. It's called State Street Apartments, and this is a reuse of a historic building. New Ulm is interesting. They have both gained population and lost jobs, or gained population and lost housing. So they've lost more than 250 affordable housing opportunities since 2000, but they were really a bit stuck. So the last new affordable rental housing was created back in 1994, so that was a long wait. And a dedicated group of community leaders came together, including civic leaders and community volunteers, and they worked on this new vision for the city of New Ulm called NU 2020. And one of the initiatives that came out of it was the Housing Initiative Needs Task Force. So they really drilled down and thought about what are the sort of housing needs of our community, how can we adapt to meet the changing and growing population housing needs. And they identified a site that was the State Street Middle School, which is right in the heart of downtown. So when you think about some of the priorities that we have in terms of location efficiency, workforce housing, planned community development, and also supportive housing, because this contained 4 long-term homelessness units, this really sort of hit a lot of sort of the state priorities, but it also was addressing specific community needs. Interestingly, they were also able, because they were very smart about the building they were choosing, this is also receiving state and federal historic tax credits, which also helped this sort of point out pretty well in terms of financial readiness to proceed. So it was really an interesting overall package with very strong community support, and between those two things really helped push this over the top. One older development, well, not older development, older selection, very new development that I think is also a really good example, and this one is in the metro area in the town of Dayton, that I think really exemplifies the way that communities can mobilize very quickly to be successful in bringing together a housing development is Balam Apartments in Dayton. Really, this one is intended to be an affordable workforce rental housing opportunity in a community that's seen a lot of job growth. Dayton is in the northwestern suburbs, and this is an area where there's been a lot of growth in particularly the warehousing industry, so a lot of decent jobs that pay okay. But the folks who are working those jobs still need a place that's affordable. And interestingly, this is an area where when the city of Dayton was looking at this piece of land that they had, initially they thought, gosh, you know, there's no way we're ever going to get anything funded. They had talked to some folks and they were pretty well assured that, oh yeah, our community is far enough out and it's not going to point and it's not going to meet the priorities of the state of Minnesota. And after a little bit of conversation, it turned out that in fact, this is one of the highest pointed locations that you could possibly imagine at that particular point in time. It didn't point at the top for anything, but it pointed really in the middle for everything. And so it ended up being a very viable development spot. It also ended up being a piece of land that was under city control. And so what they were able to do is sell the land. Well, it was actually Hennepin County who owned it. They were able to sell the land for $1 because it was a tax forfeit property. And that really helped both in terms of that local contribution piece, but also made it financially quite viable. One of the things that I think really helped this is you had very strong civic leadership that was able to take advantage of a point in time and an opportunity that was pretty unique to them. They also reached out to the development community. They did sort of a request for information from developers and were able to identify a very experienced development partner. They worked with sands companies out of the St. Cloud area. They also had a great housing study that supported the need for rental housing. So because of that, they were able to kind of articulate the value proposition for this development at this time. It was sort of a pretty remarkable and very fast development from idea to funding, probably as fast as I've ever seen. I believe it was around 5 months from idea to them coming in with a successful proposal. So in terms of next steps, before I turn it over for some information about the single family programs, certainly I would encourage everybody to spend some time navigating around the Community Profiles webpage. It is a wealth of information, and I think being familiar with the community profiles and how different areas of your city are pointing out, I think is going to be really great in terms of that longer term planning of where development can happen. Also, on our website, we have a lot of information about our multifamily resources. Now, Devin mentioned quite a lot about different programs and different ways that you can tap into resources. So go to our website, check out our multifamily rental partners area on there. We also have the multifamily financing summary that includes program guides and manuals. I think the more you know, the more successful you can be. And then we're coming up very quickly on the 2018 RFP release. So that's going to be coming out on April 16th. The application deadline for this year is June 14th. And along with releasing the RFP, we're going to have a lot of information up there, including training tutorials for the multifamily common application, And then please sign up for our e-news. The more information that you're getting, I think the better off you are. We send out e-news frequently, but not too frequently. So we won't bother you, but we will inform you. Finally, if you're looking for technical assistance, if you are a developer, if you're somebody who is planning on bringing in a deal, I would highly encourage you to contact Susan Thompson. Here is her information. If you're from a local community and you're really in sort of the preliminary thinking and planning and you're not quite ready with a deal, please contact me, and here's my contact information as well. And I know I'm running through this pretty quickly, but we will have all of this up and available on the website as well too. We're easy to reach and we want to be talking to you. And now I'm going to pass it over for some information about our single family programs.
Good morning. I'm Leanne McKenzie, and I'm going to talk about the Community Homeownership Impact Fund. We provide funding for developers and administrators of single-family, owner-occupied, affordable housing activity throughout the state. Funding is accessed through a competitive single-family request for proposals or RFP process each spring. Eligible applicants are cities, housing and redevelopment authorities, for-profit and nonprofit organizations, Indian tribes or tribal housing corporations, public housing agencies, and joint powers boards. Eligible use of funds are for acquisition, rehabilitation, and resale of existing housing, new construction including demolition or removal of existing structures with rebuild, owner-occupied rehabilitation, affordability gap to help eligible homeowners bridge the gap not covered by the first mortgage or other funding sources, and reducing interest rates on the Minnesota Housing Home Improvement Loans through a community fix-up initiative. The household income cannot exceed 115% of the area median income. There are a variety of resources available under the Impact Fund. Grants are generally awarded as permanent funds to support a value gap or for writing down the interest rate on a community fix-up loan. Grants usually do not require repayment. Deferred loans are generally used for affordability gap or owner-occupied rehab assistance. Deferred loans are in the form of a no interest, no payment 30-year loan. Repayment is required if the borrower is no longer occupies the property as their principal residence or in 30 years. Interim loans are available for construction financing of homes to be built or rehab activities. The interest rate is yet to be determined, but will be below market rate. And housing infrastructure bond proceeds are only available to community land trusts for land acquisition and a few other eligible expenses. Indian set aside, we generally set aside $1.2 million for Indian proposals. The single-family RFP announcement will be posted to the Minnesota Housing website on April 16, 2018. We will be providing an RFP informational webinar in May. The single-family application deadline is June 12, 2018 at noon. An electronic submission of the application and all required documentation and also one hard copy of the application must be received no later than June 12, 2018 with the noon deadline. Award decisions will be made on October 25th, 2018. This does conclude the community profiles presentation, and now we're going to turn it over if there are any questions. Okay.
Okay, so we have a couple of questions. The first one is, will you be able to share the PowerPoint after the webinar? I would love to use this as a reference. Yes, we will be posting the PowerPoint as well as the webinar itself on our website today, so anybody can use it as a reference. The second one, and I'm going to have this question directed at Devin, and it says, can you walk through what are considered to be intermediary costs? So what kind of costs are we talking about when we're talking about intermediary costs?
Okay, so this is a question around intermediary costs. Those are typically different types of soft costs. I would want to bring up our workbook here and see if that actually can highlight for you. We have if you are applying for multifamily resources through our development programs, this is a good tool, and we did release our workbook. Now the question will be, how easily can I get there? We did release that recently. We do, when we say that the application gets released on April 16th, there are parts of our application that we release in advance of that even, because that gives you the ability to start working on pieces of this much sooner. So this is a good opportunity to kind of promote the fact, and when you do get subscribed to our e-news, you get notices of when things get released. And so within our workbook, it's got a number of different tabs, and I don't believe we have an exact definition of our intermediary costs, but as you move through our workbook into various tabs, you can sort of see the tabs down here at the bottom. There are certain tabs that populate as part of our intermediary costs as you're moving through this workbook, and those can include certain types of fees, tax credit fees, for example. There are a number of different fees kind of involved, as you can sort of see here, you know, that may come into play. We also have boxes here for other types of fees, you know, syndicator and investment fees, and different other aspects related to some of those types of fees that get populated as part of our intermediary costs. And you can see over here, we've got this column M that sort of checks whether or not that populates into our total calculation for those intermediary costs. So the architect's fee, design, architect's fee, supervision, marketing, those all get populated, appraisal fee, energy audit, if you're using an energy consultant, the market study, if it's tax credit development, the compliance fees, I'd have to cross over there, do get calculated in for that first year. Legal fees, if there are relocation costs, again, some of this depends on what you're doing and the type of housing development, but this should give you kind of the resources and tools so that you can actually drill down to that more level of specificity. And you can see, again, if it's tax credits, the syndicator and investor fees, and other types of financing costs that get embedded into that and are considered intermediary costs. So hopefully that gets you your answer, but also the tools and resources to be able to access as you start to plug numbers together to know how those start to add up in your particular project. Okay, I'm not sure if everyone heard my answer to there was a question about small area plans, so I will repeat. It sounded like for some reason our sound, we got muted. But the question was, would a small area plan count for planned community development? And my answer to that is it's really less about a plan per se and more about demonstration that there's active implementation of that plan. And what I did is I brought up our self-scoring worksheet. This is the one for if you're applying for tax credits, which is our most commonly used self-scoring worksheet. What's great about this is developers or applicants actually come in and evaluate how they score on these individual criteria and submit this with the application so you can see how you think you're scoring. We then, of course, evaluate that and make sure that you've scored yourself correctly and make adjustments or tweaks as needed. But if you scroll to our planned community development scoring criteria, you can see that there are 5 things listed here that you are required that an applicant has to demonstrate in order to qualify under the scoring criteria. You have to demonstrate a list of stakeholders involved in their role, the milestones or steps that have been completed, underway, and are planned, including dates and stakeholders involved, key investments in kind or other financial commitments that have been made or are pending that are critical for implementation. We'd like dates for those commitments. Affordable housing needs to be a key strategy, and then you need to provide information about the targeted geographic location of that plan. So to the degree that your small area plan encompasses these things, that's great. If your small area plan covers 4, but maybe you need to augment the application and highlight and update it with what milestones or steps have been completed or continue to be underway, then we'd recommend that you augment that small area plan with any of these 5 steps, because really it's demonstrating these 5 things, and whether your small area plan does that or that does that, plus some additional information, It certainly sounds like you're at a very good starting place with that small area plan, but you do want to make sure that you are highlighting how these 5 specific things are being addressed in that community. Thanks for that question.
Okay, so it looks like we're reaching the end of our time. This is sort of my last call for questions. I think we've answered everything we received. Okay. Well, thank you everybody for participating, for listening in. Once again, if you have any questions at all, please let us know. We are going to be posting both the webinar and the PowerPoint on our website. We hope you take a look at it and follow up with us if you have any questions. In the meantime, thank you so much for listening in, and we'll be in touch.